Yeah, we are live on YouTube and we are live on Zoom. So good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the Future of Drupal CMS webinar. We're very, very excited to have you all here today. My name is Shiv Bhatt. I'm a marketing, I'm a member of the marketing department here at CyberDuck. I would like to introduce you to Danny Bluestone, our CEO, who's joining us, Tim Lennon from the Drupal Association over in Portland, Oregon. We also have Alan Botright joining us from Acquia, and from Shore Cloud we have Luke Potter, and from our very own CyberDuck we have Duncan Worrell and Mira Rao. Excellent. So let's get started. Okay, so I'm just going to walk everyone through a little bit of what's going to happen today. So I've just introduced you to our panelists. Just so you know, we are live on YouTube and on Zoom. And also, we currently have, I believe, over 32 people on YouTube and over 19 people currently in Zoom as well. So exciting times for us all. Just a few of the things we're going to talk about today. So we're going to talk about Drupal 9. We're going to talk about upgrading and migrating to upgrading and migrating to Drupal 9, the authoring experience within that, the UX and the content strategy, and Drupal 9 security and why it's really important. And finally, we'll be doing a Q&A. The webinar is going to run for around an hour and 15 minutes. So we'll try and answer some questions as we go from YouTube and from Zoom. And as I mentioned, you are being live streamed, so welcome. Okay, first we want to introduce you to CyberDuck, and I will hand it off to our CEO, Danny Bluestone. Danny, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Shiv. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here today and to talk to this great community. So CyberDuck, we've been going now for 15 years, and our mission is really to transform digital applications and websites. When we first started the business in 2005, we had one goal: to design amazing and build amazing websites, and we're still doing that today. Obviously, the times have changed in the last 15 years. The internet has become a commodity. Products and services, whether it's financial, healthcare, government, everything now runs online. So obviously managing information and data has become a lot more complicated. This is why at CyberDuck we use Drupal, which is an amazing CMS. At CyberDuck we have our main headquarters in the UK, but we have teams in Portugal, Spain, and the US as well. We follow an accredited methodology for all our work, which involves a lot of user research, technology auditing, and strategy. And my colleagues, Duncan and Mira, will talk a bit more about that later. So we're very proud to have launched this website a couple of months ago now for Sport England, which is all about how the government in this country want to keep the nation active. It's especially important during the times of the pandemic, where a lot of people were stuck at home and they needed a really good resource about how they stay active. Now, this is a Drupal website. The project in itself was a redesign, so there were thousands and thousands of pages. So we had to go through a content strategy process and obviously set up a new Drupal instance and move all the content there. Obviously, it had to go through a lot of design and accessibility requirements. Here in the UK, if you are a government or public body, your website has to meet very strict accessibility and usability measures for it to launch. Another great client that CyberDuck are proud to support is the Commonwealth. So it's an intergovernmental organization. So they represent over 50 different countries. And each particular country has various kind of needs that are very different to other countries. We're helping them at the moment with their digital strategy to basically improve their websites. And this website in itself will also need to be eventually upgraded as well to a newer version of Drupal. So as you can see, we're pretty much living and breathing Drupal at the moment here at CyberDuck. As part of organizing this webinar, we reached out to you guys, to the community, the people now on the Zoom and YouTube session. We asked you guys what is really important to you when you think about migrating and upgrading. And actually, one of the most important things is making sure that the user experience ultimately works and is quite personalized for the users. content migration topics are also very important to you guys, as well as upgrading the modules and, of course, the author experience. We're going to talk about all of these things today. Over to you, Shiv.
Thanks, Danny. And without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce Tim Lennon, CTO of the Drupal Association. Tim, over to you.
Thanks. Thank you, Shiv. Thank you, Danny. Thanks for having me here. I'm happy to be invited and participate in this conversation and talk with you all about Drupal 9 and the exciting elements that are in there. I'm going to pause here just on my first slide a little bit to tell you a little bit about why I'm excited about Drupal 9 and why I think you should be too. So Drupal 9 is the culmination of a change in the community development process that built Drupal. When we introduced Drupal 8 about 5 years ago, we moved to a model of continuous innovation where new features have been added every 6 months that greatly enhance the user experience. We talked earlier about how attendees want to speak to the attendee experience, the author experience. There's a lot of tremendous work that's happened there, and that's something that Duncan will be talking about a little bit more later in the presentation. So there's a lot to be excited about. And before I go into the rest of my slides, I do want to encourage you to check this out on Drupal.org. You can find information about Drupal 9 in more detail, or a recent blog post on Stack Overflow that I wrote that can give you a real good deep dive. So let's keep going. I think one of the things that's important to consider is where Drupal falls in the CMS marketplace and how it compares to some of the proprietary solutions out there that you might be using if you're an existing heavy CMS user, or that you might be considering in a comparison with Drupal. So over the years, Drupal has increased its focus on richness and reach. What Dries, the founder of Drupal, calls ambitious digital experiences. So that doesn't necessarily mean that those have to be sites of huge enterprise scale, although it can mean that. What it really means is anyone who has a digital use case that requires building an experience that's engaging, that's interactive, that goes beyond just reading a brochure in a digital format. So Drupal has done a lot in that space. In fact, I think we're the leader in the digital experience space in many ways. So, from a security perspective, because we are such a large open source project and we believe in the power of transparency and open source, we have tremendous resources from the community and also from organizations that sponsor the Drupal security team. The scalability and performance features of Drupal are unparalleled. If you want to dive into this a little bit more, look up BigPipe. BigPipe in Drupal, it's a feature introduced originally in Drupal 8 and enhanced in Drupal 9, is just an incredible tool for improving the time to first page render for all your digital experiences. And of course, Drupal is known for its flexibility, the ability to build the experience that exactly meets your needs and to integrate all of the modules and themes that the community has developed to make that an easier process, increase your time to market, and just make that a quicker process. In addition, we have a few more points of comparison here. So from a maintenance perspective, of course, because Drupal is open source, there's always that full access to the source code to help you support and maintain your Drupal sites. And there's a huge amount of community support. So not only does the community help support bug fixes, features, and security, but there's an ecosystem of organizations, including experts like the CyberDuck team here, who can help you with everything that you need to do. There's no vendor lock-in in the Drupal space the way there is. So, with some proprietary platforms, you get the roadmap that they want. With Drupal, you can be part of that decision-making process. You can help define the roadmap for the product. And finally, there's no licensing fees for Drupal itself. We do recommend working with experts, and of course, there's always a cost associated with that, but the cost is directly related to building your use case and your site, and not just taking up those budgets with ongoing fees. So I think it's some really powerful reasons to put Drupal at the top of your list, in addition to the technical and features that Duncan is going to talk about a little bit later. I want to briefly touch on some news that actually just came out yesterday. So this slide has just changed overnight. So many of you out there might be on Drupal 7, and Drupal 7 was originally scheduled for end of life in November of 2021. And we have just announced, the Drupal security team and the Drupal core maintainers have just announced that support is being extended for 1 more year. And I want to speak to that on a couple fronts, because this extension doesn't mean that we should procrastinate on our upgrades to get to Drupal 9, right? It's there to provide a little bit of extra breathing room, and it's there to provide more support from the community itself, so that community maintainers of modules and the security team continue to help update the migration path from 7 to 9, continue to help update the modules to make sure they're compatible and get you ready. But I would still strongly encourage you to work on this update as soon as you can. Because you'll need the time that you can get. The migration from 7 to 9 is the last big migration in Drupal. After that, the upgrade process is significantly easier. And if you're already on Drupal 8, it's quite an easy process. There are some people out there who've been tweeting about it, and even on the first day of Drupal's launch, they've completed their updates in like 15 or 30 minutes. It's pretty cool. This talks a little bit about end of life and support. Certainly, if you have more questions, please put them in our Q&A and we can talk about them some more at the end. I want to talk specifically about that actual process of updating to Drupal 9. So it's really a 5-step process that you would need to undertake. And it's the kind of thing that you can do with an internal IT team, but you can find experts in the community who can help you to go through this process. So the main things that you need to do is ensure that your environment is compatible. This means the system requirements have changed, right? We're on later versions of PHP, of MySQL, and that's because those versions are the ones that now have security support. A lot of times you might find that, if you're still in the MySQL 5 generation, you're actually perhaps at risk because that's no longer getting regular updates. If you're on Drupal 8, or if you've managed to get there already, you need to make sure that Drupal 8 core is just on the latest version. Those updates come out every 6 months, the minor version updates with new features, and those updates are quite easy to perform. You'll need to make sure that the contributed projects that you use, the community-built modules, are ready for Drupal 9 and be updated to the latest versions of those so that you're prepared for that update. And I'll talk a little bit more about that because I know that's an important topic for many of the people watching. And then if you have custom code, you need to make sure that that code has been made ready as well, that it removes the things that were deprecated from Drupal 8 and uses the versions of those functions that are Drupal 9 ready. But once those 4 kind of prerequisites are ready, you can just update Drupal core itself to Drupal 9. And if you are one of those Drupal 8 users, that actual update is pretty much identical, as long as you meet these prerequisites, to an update from, say, 8.7 to 8.8. It's so much easier than these updates used to be when you had to do a replatforming. So it's a really good situation. So let's talk a little bit more about those projects, those contributed modules that that everybody uses to kind of snap together and build their Drupal sites. So firstly, if you're coming from Drupal 7, something that's really important to know is that a lot of those features that might have come from contributed modules before are actually now part of Drupal core, right? Views is part of Drupal core. Some of the really core functionality is in there already. So you may not need to find a contributed module in order to keep doing that core functionality that you use on your site. But similarly, this slide here was actually a snapshot from the day of Drupal 9's release. It's already improved even further to show that the top 200 most used contributed modules are, at the time, they were 87% already compatible with Drupal 9. That's up to maybe 97% today. It's already moved even more. And these top 200 projects cover probably 95% of the site use cases out there. So if you're thinking to yourself, oh, it's going to be a while before the modules are ready for Drupal 9, that's probably not the case. Many of them are ready today. And that's something you should definitely check out. Finally, there's a few tools that you can use that'll help you determine whether you're ready to go. So this is something that a partner can help you install and set up, run these tools, or you can work with your IT teams when you're building requirements to work with your partners. One is the upgrade status module, which you can install, which here's a couple screenshots here. Basically, it'll do a site audit of the installed modules you have, the environment versions, basically those sort of 5 steps that I showed before. It'll help you check all of those and see, are you actually ready to perform this upgrade? And it'll give you some warnings or errors if there are any issues, and information about how to remediate those and get those solved. Another tool is the Upgrade-Rector, or also Drupal-Rector. So this is a really cool tool provided by the community on Drupal.org that actually can automatically update your custom modules or contributed modules. It covers more than 50% of the most common compatibility issues in custom code or contributed modules. So basically, you can run this tool against your custom code. It gives you a patch, and you can apply that patch and usually be ready to go. It won't necessarily cover everything, but it can give you a huge jumpstart on upgrading custom code to be ready for Drupal 9.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Tim. I believe that is I believe that's it. Yeah, that was thank you very much for your insight. That was really, really interesting. And I think it's really great to hear from you about how, even though Drupal 9 is coming into the future, now is the best time to upgrade. And it's never been more important than now to upgrade, especially with what's going on in the world. And I think it's very, very insightful.
You know, it's not just about that capacity to upgrade. It's going to be about taking advantage of these features that we've talked about, and all these tools that the community's provided. It's really, I really think it's a generational leap, much more so than any prior version of Drupal.
Definitely. We just have a quick question here from someone on Zoom. Someone has asked, they're not too sure if we are on Drupal 7, should we be aiming to move to Drupal 9 or aim to move to Drupal 8 in order to then move to Drupal 9?
Oh, that's a great question. So prior to 9's official release, its stable release, we were telling folks, hey, get to 8 and that'll get you ready for 9. But now that 9 is out, you can actually go directly from 7 to 9. The same migration tool that takes you from 7 to 8 can be used to take you from 7 to 9. So there may be a few exceptions, like if there were some major contributed modules that just weren't ready yet, maybe you'd want to do the intermediate upgrade to 8 first. But probably for 90% of people who are on 7, I would target a direct upgrade to 9.
Awesome. Well, that's great. Thank you very much for that, Tim. And now I would like to hand over to Alan Botwright, Master Solutions Architect at Acquia. Alan?
Thanks, Shiv. Okay, could you go to the next slide, please, Shiv? Thank you. So, hi guys, my name is Alan Botwright. I've been with Acquia now for 6 years, and I've been involved with Drupal for 13 years. So I'm in the privileged position of being able to see what some of our 5,000 customers do, or not all of them, of course, but I've got a great deal of experience what works out there in the real world. For those that don't know who Acquia are, we're the company that Dries Weitart started. He began the Drupal project, obviously, in his dorm room in 2001, and he set up Acquia in 2007, mainly to meet the enterprise requirements for the growing Drupal project. And I'm pleased to say that 13 years later, we're here and with our 5,000 customers working across the board, and ultimately unlocking business value for our many customers using the benefits of open source, ultimately by de-risking Drupal in the cloud. We've kind of branched out over the years from what we call Drupal Cloud, which is the platform and service side of things and the tooling around this. I'm going to talk a little bit about migration in a minute. And we've also got some other technologies that we are now collectively known as the Marketing Cloud, which is mainly our data personalization, inbound, outbound marketing data, customer data platforms. Next slide, please. One of the things I want to get into today is building a lot on what Tim was talking about earlier on. From our data at the moment, we were seeing like roughly 64% of people are sitting on Drupal 7. And obviously factoring in as well that we've now had an extension to to Drupal 7 now is going to be available for another year, supported from a security point of view at least as well, and the community. There's also what Tim didn't cover in his part is what I'd like to cover around specifically the jump between Drupal 7 and Drupal 9. Now, it's true, of course, that this is what we're trying to encourage our customers to do, to go from 7 to 9. But importantly, is taken advantage of the extra time we've now got to be able to deal with effectively the custom elements of that migration process. I want to get into a bit more detail around some of the challenges you're going to have in migrating, particularly large projects. And the next slide that I'm going to go to now, if you may, Shiv. This is like a typical project outline here. So looking at the sort of phases involved in migration and looking at a project that's somewhere around this mark between 800K and 1.2 million. So a larger size of a website in there around this point of view. Now specifically, the move between Drupal 7 to Drupal 9 without the benefits of Drupal 8 over the last many years, we've not benefited from some of the core benefits of what Drupal 8 brought to the table. And a lot of that was the ability to take what was originally supplied by custom modules in Drupal 7 and having a knowledge of the best modules to use. Drupal 7 configurations were typically quite varied. And it's based a lot on the experience of the particular Drupal developer to put together the right kind of application. And what Drupal 8 did was allowed you to have a much more of a standardized Drupal installation, mainly because a lot of the core functions were built into that. Now, coming from Drupal 7 to Drupal 9, obviously you haven't been through that process, so there's a lot of customizations and unknowns within there. Next slide, please. What we at Acquia are trying to do here, and when the technology is building on what Tim was saying earlier on, we're looking at how we can automate that process as much as possible. So it's building on some of the tooling that Tim referred to earlier on, but also taking it a little bit further. Our objective really is to reduce costs by at least 50%. And that is by helping to get some idea about scope of the migration process. So that means we need some intelligence around there. Even a discovery process typically in this is to understand where the custom code is, and importantly, which code we need to carry over and which functionality can be supported from core specifically, and that's part of this process as well. But we've been developing some tooling within Acquia for over a year now that's built into our platform specifically. Next slide, please. The idea of being able to take your application, this is the Acquia Cloud dashboard, where you can click on a button and effectively it's going to do an analysis of your code base. The idea there is it's going to give you an indication of what's immediately migratable for you and give you some insight in some compatibility of modules, which modules are going to work, which one can replace existing modules that are there. But also we're looking at how do we deal with that custom element as well. So it's giving as much information as possible to our customers so they can assess the amount of effort involved. Because effectively Drupal 7 to Drupal 9 is a migration path, but there's a lot of change to be made. And for the customers going from 8 to 9, that's straightforward. And that's part of what Drupal 8 addressed, and moving to 9, it continues on that tradition of making it much easier to upgrade. So what Acquia are looking to deliver with this tooling built into our platform is the ability to be able to click a button and automate as much, like at least 50% of that effort. And certainly make it clear where custom code can be introduced back into the core distribution specifically. Next slide, please, Shiv. So for example, here it's an example of our early tooling around this, where you're clicking a button, you're going to get a report running the Acquia Migrate Accelerator against that. And ultimately, next slide, please, you're going to see a list of modules, compatibilities. Some of the tooling that Tim talked about earlier on is built upon that, but it's going a bit further. We're going to add a bit more context around the type of modules and the type of work that's involved in upgrading this process. So at the end of this, we have a good route to Drupal 9 with as much of the risk and effort that's involved in there. And I think from point of view of Acquia, for existing Acquia customers, there'll be Acquia customers on the call today, we're augmenting that with our own value add services from point of views of support actually, and to drive customer success in this process. I think as well, it's also encouraging the ongoing success with Drupal more broadly. We know that if you've had a lot of value with Drupal 7, the treasure trove that's offered to you by, if you haven't used Drupal 8 and Drupal 9, unlocking that value to your projects, ultimately driving better digital experiences to create competitive advantage out there as well. And I think all of us, I didn't want to mention COVID, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think the idea of some of these digital transformation projects, certainly what I've seen is how quickly things have moved in the last few months. What was optional is no longer optional. People know this is the channel that needs to be right. And I've certainly seen huge amount of movement and people progressing very, very quickly with their projects, understanding that having a a very solid, robust digital channel, and sort of the tooling around that Drupal provides as well, having that available to drive customer engagement and customer and digital experiences is never been more important. And on that, I'll hand it back to Shiv.
Thank you, Alan. That was really, really interesting. And I think it's great to finally hear that with such a complex move from Drupal 7 to initially get to Drupal 8, that upgrading doesn't have to be difficult, and that the solutions that Acquia can provide really do help make that transition seamless.
Yeah, a lot of it's understanding some of the typical challenges out there. We have the benefit of seeing what 5,000 customers are doing, and what works and what doesn't work as well, just as important to understand. And it is all about de-risking. We need to get you the business case behind migrating from a website to the next one, just as a pure migration. That's often a difficult sell internally for your business stakeholders. So we need to at least give you guys as much information about the effort that's involved in doing that, and hopefully help you along that way. And that's what this tooling is designed to do.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Alan. And with that, I'm now going to hand it over to Duncan, our technical lead at CyberDuck.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for that, Shiv. And thanks to all the other speakers that are joining us today. There's some really good insights from all of us here. My name's Duncan Worrell. I've worked with Drupal for 12, 13 years in industries such as defense for the government, for extreme sports websites, fintech, a whole load of areas. And I thoroughly enjoy Drupal. I'm not quite evangelical, but I do love it. So let's go to the next slide. Let's get going. What's better about Drupal 8? Once upon a time, the goal was to launch a new website. Website development was all about launching a shiny new website. The end. That should just be the start of the story, really. It's not the end. Your website should evolve. Your website should allow you to react quickly to changing goals, and the CMS should provide access to all your data wherever you might need it, whether that's from a website or from within an app on a mobile device. Back in 2011, when Drupal 7 was first released, it was very good at delivering shiny new websites, but things have moved on. Many of you with Drupal 7 websites will have asked developers to add a new landing page or change the layout of an existing page to support an urgent marketing requirement. And I'm sure that took longer than you expected. Drupal 8 and Drupal 9 empowers your users to create their own content. That frees up your development budget for what you should be using it for, and that's development rather than the provision and tweaking of content. And despite the title of this section, I'm mainly going to talk about Drupal 8 because the final version of Drupal 8, which is 8.9, is functionally identical to the first version of Drupal 9, which was released beginning of June, and that's version 9 of Drupal. Go back for a sec, Shiv. The roadmap for Drupal 9 is exciting, and you can read about that online. But for those currently on Drupal 7, the upgrade to Drupal 8 offers many tangible benefits. Beyond improvements to performance, flexibility, security, stability, and scalability that Tim's already touched on, one of the main focuses for Drupal 8 was the out-of-the-box experience for content authors and editors, the people who really use Drupal every single day. Here are some of the highlights to get you excited about your Drupal 8/9 website. First of all, straight out of the box, there's a brand new editor in Drupal. It's built into core, and those of you familiar with Drupal 7 will probably recognize the name CK Editor. It's built on CK Editor. There were several editors, WYSIWYGs, in Drupal 7. There's now just one. It's used for everything. It makes the development much more stable. It's got all the usual formatting you're familiar with, but it's now customizable depending on who you are and what you're doing. And it offers a host of new features, such as embedding content from external sources, such as YouTube or Twitter, simply by pasting in a URL. You can create custom styles that can be applied directly without the need for developers to get involved in changing a theme. There's better previews, and it also offers a mobile-friendly interface. That's in the editing side of things, not in the content viewing. So editors can now do their work on mobiles. Something else we've gone too far. That's the one. Something else that is really good for editors is in-place editing. So here's a website. It's for a site we're currently developing for the College of Policing. And up in the top right-hand corner, there's an edit button. Click the edit button, and all of a sudden you've got these little edit symbols, which mean I've highlighted two. You can see there's 5 there. That means you can edit that stuff straight in the screen straight away. You want to change the title of that node, you click on that, you do it. You don't have to go into the edit page anymore. It makes it so much easier to get to your content and make it more flexible to edit. There's a new powerful drag and drop page layout builder. That lets editors build the pages they need. A layout is selected for a section, 1, 2, 3 columns, perhaps a stacked layout, and the user adds blocks to that layout to build up their page. It's all drag and drop. Those blocks can be content that's provided by the CMS, for example, a list of latest headlines straight out of Views. As Tim said, Views is now in core. It can be content from other modules, perhaps a map from the Google Maps module, or it can be content you've created somewhere else. Drupal 8 also allows you to create something called custom blocks, and think of those as mini content types. What it does is allows you to enter content to be added straight into your layouts, and it helps you build a coherent looking website whilst empowering your users to build those pages that they need. There's a new media library. This is built straight into the editor as well, but it's also a separate page, and it offers a single place for you to upload and manage all of your files, images, videos, audio, documents, and also embedded content. There's no more hunting around in your hard drive for a file you used last month. It's ready and waiting in the media library, and you can quickly find it by typing in a name or sorting by date or category. If you need to upload all the assets from a recent photo shoot, no problem. You can bulk upload the lot through the media library. And like I said, it's built straight into the editor as well. I put a few things here together. This is my sort of penultimate slide. It's all about content editing Drupal 8. Certainly this part of it I'm talking about. So there's a heap of new functionality to control that content publishing. With great power comes great responsibility. And we put the tools in place in Drupal 8 to make sure that that is a controlled content publishing workflow. So workflows acknowledges that content has a life cycle. They aren't just drafts or published, as in Drupal 7. They may start as a draft and go to review, get published, go through a revision cycle, and eventually be archived. You can build flexible workflows that fit every single part of your website and can be specific to every single piece of content, or at least every single specific type of content. Content moderation builds on those workflows and controls who can do what within your team of content creators, and uses Drupal's powerful roles and permissions framework that many of you will be already familiar with. Revisions are created for all content types by default, so you can see who changed what, when, and they can tell you why. You can view side-by-side comparisons of versions and revert to an older version if you need. So hopefully you can see that there's lots to be excited about with Drupal 8. I'm going to talk very briefly about front-end considerations. We can probably just go straight into this whole slide. I think there's 4 bullet points.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk generally about these bullet points.
Sorry.
Okay, you carry on. So the theme layout in Drupal 8 uses a brand new templating engine called Twig. So what it means is the upgrade to Drupal 8 will mean that developers need to recreate any custom templates that you had that define the look and feel of your website. There's no easy migration route between PHP template, which was a Drupal 7 templating engine, and Twig. So it's a great opportunity for you to undertake a site redesign. And any site redesign is a great opportunity for you to look at user research. You can prune old content, as well as determining what functional changes you might want that Drupal 8 can give you. I know Mira's going to talk about that next, so I'm not going to steal her thunder. But she's also, one of the other things she's also going to talk about is accessibility. I'm going to talk very briefly about accessibility because Drupal's internal accessibility working group have focused very keenly on accessibility that's built right into the core of Drupal 8, in the same way that they've concentrated on the editor experience. Some of those new features simply work. Some will need developers and to apply their know-how to get the very best out of them, whilst others are related to the design of the website. And I'm thinking things like color contrasts, and also with the content editing itself, to make sure that the content creators are aware of not repeating titles, using proper buttons, those sorts of things. That's the end of my session. Whilst the upgrade from Drupal 8 and beyond is relatively easy, I think we do need to acknowledge that the upgrade from Drupal 7 is not trivial. Whether you go to 8 and stop, or go straight to 9, which is the current recommendation. It's why many hundreds of thousands of websites have not made that jump in the 5 years since Drupal 8 was released. Yesterday's news that support for Drupal 7 will be extended to the end of 2022 should be welcomed, but not so we can ignore the problem for another year, but as a real opportunity to upgrade as soon as possible and to reap the benefits of a modern CMS. I hope I've been able to show you that that effort will be worth it. Thank you very much. Back to you, Shiv.
Thank you, Duncan. That was very insightful. Lots of great points there to digest and think about. Just see if we have any questions coming in from our audience. Actually, I do. One point I guess is worth raising is with everything that's going to be happening with the authoring experience, what do you think will be the most powerful feature that will benefit users across the board? Oh, Duncan, you're on mute there.
Oh, sorry. That happened to someone, wasn't it? It had to be me. From my point of view, Drupal 7 was quite good at creating a page, but the pages are very limited to how the developer saw those pages. They weren't very flexible. The layout builder is amazing. The media manager is amazing. Having one stable editor is really good. The workflows are nice to have if you're in a big organization. But for me, the layout builder and the media manager are proper magic. And I've got to applaud the Drupal core team for what they've done. The roadmap for Drupal 9, if you can find the details for it, it looks like there's more of the same coming. But they know Drupal 8 and Drupal 9 isn't WordPress. There's things we can learn from those sort of more, I don't want to call them hobbyist type CMSs, but those smaller websites, builders, things like Wix, Foursquare. There's things we can learn from there. And I think that's looking at the roadmap for Drupal. I think those things will come. So Drupal 9 is, and Drupal 8 and 9 are staging points. Drupal 9.1 is where the more magic starts to happen. And I'm really looking forward to where we go from there.
That's awesome. Thank you very much, Duncan. And speaking of UX, now it's time to hand over to Mira Rao. She is the UX strategist here at Cyberduck, and she'll be talking about the UX strategy and content strategy for Drupal 9. Mira, over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Shiv, and thanks everybody for joining. We could go to the next slide. So we know that simply having a website is no longer enough, and to maximize the potential of your site, you definitely do need to take into account the user experience. And this includes everything from how people navigate on the site to how they come away feeling. So it is a balancing act, meeting modern users' experience expectations of being intuitive, engaged, and personalized, as Tim mentioned earlier, while also maintaining a robust and flexible platform. And from what we've heard, this is something that Drupal can help achieve. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that I would encourage you to do, especially as you start looking into updating to Drupal 9 and migrating content across, so you can take advantage of some of the new and improved Drupal features. Next slide. So you can't design something for users if you don't know who they are. Start with quantitative research and look into your existing analytics to develop some hypotheses around what issues people may be experiencing on the site and why. So here we ask what does the hard data tell us? What are the most important or popular pages or the least accessed pages, and what are people looking for? Qualitative research, so whether this is in-depth user interviews or user studies, they help you go deeper to listen and get insights and test all your newly formed hypotheses. And here we ask why. Why do different users feel a certain way? What are they trying to accomplish, and why are they trying to accomplish? What are their pain points and frustrations? And you can start thinking about some of the solutions that may solve these pain points and help them meet their needs. Also, you can do some usability tests on your sites to diagnose things that already exist, and issues that people struggle with. And you can also test your hypothesis on any new concepts and designs. Now that you have all your data and insights and you know a fair bit about your users, I'd recommend mapping your customer journey step by step. So essentially, a journey map tells the story of the customer's experience with your brand or your product or your service and helps you understand the website interaction in context. So where are people coming from? How do they interact with the company at every key stage? What are their offline influences, experiences, and dependencies? All of this impacts how they interact with your website and can highlight any opportunities you have to improve the overall experience. And one thing I would definitely add here is from a UX perspective, a journey map should never be a deliverable. It's a living document that needs to keep evolving and developing as you acquire new insights. The next thing to look at is the content strategy for the website. And I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here when I say that content is no longer just a byproduct of website design. It's fundamental to a good user experience. So I'll call out some of the key points that are important to consider at any time, but especially when you're focused on reviewing and migrating web content. So the first thing is definitely make sure there is a user need. Your user research will help you understand what these are. And this is an established practice in content design. For instance, on gov.uk, which a lot of you may have used, every single piece of content should meet a valid user need before it's even published. And so the follow-on point here is, if you go next, is to give users easy access to the content they need, not the content you think they need. The next. But the reality is that often you will have instances where content cannot be rewritten. You know, it's there for a legal reason, or it needs massive rounds of approvals, or you have tight deadlines. And so where you can't rewrite it or change it fundamentally, you need to make sure you're adding summaries, structured headers, and adding a hierarchy, good quality tagging, layouts, and styles to make sure that people can find it easily, to make sure that the right terms that help it from an SEO perspective are being used. And they also help users scan the content much quicker. And definitely you need to be reusing consistent design elements. So when a user arrives on the page, they know exactly what to expect from a layout, where the summary sits, where the sidebar is, what they can probably expect at the end of the page. An approach I would encourage you to take when reviewing the website content is definitely be ruthless. So the next point, think about what you really need to keep and maintain. Major reductions in content volume will not only help users, but they'll also help prevent any content debt and repeated work by content creators and editors. And you can use the Moscow prioritization technique, so the must have, should have, could have, won't have at this time, to prioritize and retire content that doesn't have any user need or acceptance criteria. And I would encourage you to do this with stakeholders. You can also use user research and analytics to test and validate your assumptions as you go through this exercise, particularly around high and low traffic pages and journeys. Yeah, I mentioned the analytics. And finally, the last point, make sure you've engaged all the relevant stakeholders, particularly where you have multiple teams and people involved in the creation and approval of content. Because you might decide that you're not going to keep this piece of content or change what is reflected on a website, but there might be a lot of offline workflows and processes sitting behind it. It might actually be somebody's job to be regularly going in and updating that content. And so when you're thinking about content strategy, you do need to think about the knock-on impact of any of these decisions you make. I mean, just like content, interaction design, and web performance, accessibility is a core consideration when creating and running websites. And so it's really heartening to hear that a lot of the work that Drupal's been doing around accessibility will help support this, because improving the usability for everyone on the web is important. And it includes 4 broad parameters that you can see here. One is visual, making it easy for people to see content; auditory, making it easy for them to hear, making it easy for people to use; and cognitive, making it easy for people to understand. Setting aside the morality of inclusive design and accessibility, organizations who neglect accessibility are probably at legal risk now as well. So as a starting point, I would encourage doing an accessibility audit, either in-house or maybe using third-party testers. And this can be both automated and manual testing against standard web content accessibility guidelines criteria. What you can do to improve accessibility is a whole separate talk, which I'm not going to do here, but I'll call out a few things. So ensure that all the functionality and navigation is keyboard accessible, because it's not just people with screen readers who use keyboards. It's also for people maybe who don't have a mouse or who can't use a mouse. Or as you can see, like in the United Nations screenshot there, having a simple and clear navigation bar and a menu not only helps users travel to where they need to go on the site, but also gives them a summary of what they can expect to find. And things like breadcrumbs and consistent page titles help people orient themselves. And these are simple things you can use to improve the overall experience of the site. Good page content, hierarchy, and structure also helps people understand which text is most important. And having clear and concise headers and subheaders make the page easy to skim. This and similarities in layouts on similar pages helps users consume content easily and find what they're looking for quickly. So for instance, that screenshot there you see on your right, that's IMDb. It's always laid out in the same place. You know where to go to find cast information, where to find storyline information. And as you start thinking about structuring your content in a consistent way, it helps people use the content and engage with your site much faster. And finally, make sure text meets minimum size requirements. It has adequate contrast and can be enlarged. So, using images to present text is a no-no. Make sure text alternatives are provided for all images. And you can do things like providing transcripts for audio and video content and ensure that these can be paused. They're not just automatically playing when you load the page, and that there are volume controls. So these are just some of the things to take into consideration, and hopefully this has been useful. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Mira. That was very, very insightful again. And I think I can speak for all of us here that we all agree and applaud the work that Drupal are doing within the UX community and for users across the world, and making sites more accessible and really raising the bar and the standard for people to not just access websites regardless of their abilities, but also to empower users and to create really powerful websites too. So very, very insightful. Thank you. Let's see if we have any questions coming in from our audience here on Zoom. Yes, we have a question. Let's have a look. So James Sandham has asked, for UX, do I provide text alternatives or for all images? Mira, I think that's a UX question you could answer.
Yeah, so I can take that. So not all images, but for instance, sometimes we might be using images that are just there for a decorative purpose. It's a stock image that's just sitting there. You don't need to add all text for those kind of images, but definitely ones where something in context. If that's important to the article or the page, then you should definitely be providing that.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Okay, and finally, on to our final panelist. I'd like to introduce you all to Luke Potter, the Director of Cybersecurity at SureCloud. Luke.
Hello, everyone. And first and foremost, thank you very much to Shiv and Danny and the wider CyberDuck team for inviting SureCloud along to speak with you all this afternoon. So I'm the Cybersecurity Director at SureCloud. We partner with CyberDuck for mainly in the sort of risk and cyber compliance cybersecurity spaces. So I actually run the cyber division here at SureCloud. So we deliver penetration tests and vulnerability assessments to CyberDuck's clients and also our wider client base as well, which I'll talk more around later. So who are SureCloud? As I mentioned, we have a sort of risk advisory and a cybersecurity practice. We also have a large software side to our business, focusing very much in the GRC or governance, risk and compliance sector. So we provide applications to help organizations manage what would traditionally be spreadsheet-driven compliance processes for varying levels of spreadsheet processes, things like 27001 compliance or GDPR, etc. So this element of the session is very much focused around security. It's my passion as well as my job, and we test numerous websites every year, and a number of those on Drupal and other CMS platforms. And I guess, you know, security is at the forefront of all of our minds, you know, especially at the moment. All of our security strategies have had to change very rapidly over the past few months, not least because of the COVID pandemic, but obviously enabling that remote workforce has had to change the mindset. And, you know, security should be at the forefront of every business decision we make, including something as critical to our organization as upgrading a core core platform such as Drupal or other sort of core service that we have. So clearly, as mentioned and as articulated by the other speakers, support for Drupal 7 has been extended through to November 2020, but support for Drupal 8 still ends in November 2021. Now, like everything, we should keep things patched and up to date, and that includes Drupal as much as anything. You know, the laptop in front of you has more than likely had a patch released of it today. You're probably using Zoom or YouTube. Your web browser may have been patched very recently. Your TV, your smart TV, has more than likely popped up in the past few weeks saying you need to apply a patch or an update. And like everything, one of the best security defenses you can have is to keep your environments, and in this scenario, Drupal, taking advantage of the latest security features and options. I mean, looking at Drupal 9, it's a much smaller code base than Drupal 7 and Drupal 8 or below. And a lot of the older sort of legacy code has been removed or depreciated code. So in terms of the security community looking at Drupal 9, it's getting a lot of attention, which is a good thing. As mentioned by Tim and the other speakers, it's open source and the security community is all over it, and there are patches and updates all of the time. So going forward, let alone the features and the functionality to assure that security picture and plan going forward, you know, Drupal 9 is a sensible move with that sort of security focus on. So, you know, very much make upgrading to Drupal 9 a priority. You know, start now, but believe it or not, we do still see when we're testing for clients, running our penetration testing projects for our customer base, you know, Drupal 6 and below as well. So if you are listening, watching, you know, live or on the sort of on demand, you know, and you are using Drupal 6, if anything that you do this week, you know, start getting your plans in place to migrate to a newer supported version. Next slide, please. So clearly you're going through a process of evaluating and looking with a provider. You need to have security considerations as part of that. So when you're choosing a provider to work with, look at their experience, you know, clearly how experienced they are in working in terms of Drupal in a whole, but from a security perspective, how do they train their developers? You know, do their teams have best practice knowledge around security best practice in Drupal, things like secure coding practices? Do they take advantage of things like the Open Web Application Security Project and the best practice secure coding guidelines they offer? You know, when we run penetration tests, we use as part of our methodology the OWASP testing guides, for example, but there are fantastic resources out there for development houses to use as part of their own best practices. So, you know, but bear that as part of your consideration. But also when running the migration process itself, often there's a lot of access to lots of sensitive information. You know, depending on the complexity of the migration, there may be data moving around between locations, maybe moving around between developers, maybe moving around in terms of hosting environments. You know, bear in mind when you're looking at this process, the security controls that fit around that wider kind of mechanism. So also what's happening to the data that they've had access to post-migration, you know, where's it being stored? How are any test environments or trial environments decommissioned afterwards? You know, making sure that in testing environments, no production data is used, for example, or if it is used in any way, it's fully sanitized and, you know, and anonymized as appropriate. Next slide, please. Thank you. So once you've completed your migration and you've gone through, you're now live and you're in a situation where you're sort of in a more business as usual state and you're looking forward to Drupal 10 or whatever comes next, you know, think about defining, if you haven't already done so, the security responsibilities. So, where do the responsibilities of the security of your Drupal sites or implementation lie? So, for example, you may be responsible for functional testing changes, but your development house may be responsible for keeping Drupal up to date going forward. Think about the approach you have in terms of your business, in terms of wider responsibilities, in terms of the hosting providers and where the responsibilities lie there. But most importantly, one of the best things you can do is deliver or have delivered a penetration test. So this is where a security company such as SureCloud will run a simulated sort of cyber attack against your Drupal environment or your website, with a real focus on looking for points of compromise, vulnerabilities. So we will use the same tools, techniques, methodologies as a genuine attacker would do, but we're on the right side of this. We're working in collaboration with you to improve and develop the security posture of your implementation. Just to share a bit of best practice guidance, I guess, on this call, is that we often find some very, very common weaknesses that you can take away from today and look at your implementations to make sure that you're not vulnerable to these. For example, one of the most common things we find is administrative interfaces being accessible over the internet. Clearly, they may well be protected by credentials, username and password, but often they don't have two-factor authentication enables. So in that scenario, one of the best practice advices we would say is make sure your administrative interfaces are restricted to only be accessible from locations that you trust, for example, your corporate VPN or corporate network, but also make sure that you're implementing two-factor authentication on every account, not just some accounts, every single account on that site. Wider hardening that we often see as missing is best practice web server configurations. So that will be web server best practice headers, as we call them, or HTTPS, or to not get too technical, but SSL and TLS configurations. Again, very, very common weaknesses that are easy to remediate and address. And even today, or over the coming weeks, harden your implementations that you have today or going forward. What you can also do is, regular vulnerability assessment. So this is sort of maybe automated scanning or assessments being run on a more regular basis against the site as a sort of low-hanging fruit. You may run an assessment every month to identify common vulnerabilities, and then a full manual test every year. As we've mentioned, patching core and plugins or modules is absolutely key. I mean, just last week, 18th of June, the US government issued a notice to critical vulnerabilities in Drupal, which were patched by the great community that found them. The Drupal security team were very, very quick in their response and remediation and releasing of a patch, as we see evidently in every single scenario. But the point is, just last week, 2 criticals highlights that the need to keep your environments up to date. And the fact that things are being found and are being patched is brilliant. That's what it's all about. That's what we're all here to do to improve the security posture of our systems and services. And then the final point is look at things like web application firewalls and content delivery networks. So, web application firewalls will often have Drupal components in them, which will block common attacks. And if there's an attack live going out, maybe a 0-day vulnerability or something that is not known about yet, often clearly the Drupal team will be all over it, but the web application firewall suppliers or vendors will often look to release a rule to block those attacks very, very quickly. So it's just a defense in depth approach. And then content delivery networks, there are numerous ones out there, the likes of Cloudflare or CloudFront, etc. Amazon Cloud's offerings as well can help to distribute and help you to scale very, very quickly, but also mitigate the risks of distributed denial of services attacks, which you've probably heard about against your websites as well. Okay. And then finally, what I always like to do on these sessions is just highlight sort of wider attacks to consider outside of just going on in the industry at the moment and we're seeing. So with the COVID situation, we've seen a massive uptick in social engineering attacks. Phishing, you've probably all heard of. You probably had a load of phishing emails today, very, very common. But you may not have heard of vishing, which is voice-based phishing, and smishing, which is SMS-based phishing attacks. So a lot of people don't actually realize that it's very, very simple to call you from any number that I wanted to. I could call you now from your best friend or from NHS Track and Trace or from anyone I wanted to just by spoofing the outbound number. I could also send you a text message from anyone I wanted to as well. Now, we use those techniques to demonstrate that to customers, but actually we did a piece with the BBC very, very recently demonstrating those risks. It was on the One Show a couple of weeks back. But in terms of bringing this back to the Drupal environment, be very wary of someone calling you, posing to be from your supplier or IT support company, trying to extract information from you that they may use to then compromise your website. The number that appears isn't necessarily the number they're calling from. It's called caller line ID spoofing. It's very simple to do. What we see a lot of is website cloning attacks as well, to then be used in the phishing or smishing examples. So a lot of companies will be targeted where the attack group or the attackers will register a website domain very similar to that being used for that real company. So say you're company A and your website is companyaa.com, they'll register company-a.com, clone your website, and then send you an email or a phishing message to target you very specifically, to draw you to their phishing page, to then extract information to then compromise your real website. So bear that in mind, and lots of guidance out there on the internet around that as well, on the SureCloud website. Physical attacks to consider. So where is the data? Making sure that the data is in an environment that you have done your due diligence on. And that leads me nicely into the final point, which is make sure that you've considered attacks and are doing your due diligence against suppliers. Thank you very much, Shiv, and the wider CyberDuck team.
Thank you, Luke. That's the end of our panelists' time. But we are now taking questions from the audience for them to answer. I just want to say a big thank you to all of our panelists for joining us today, to Alan, Duncan, Mira, Tim, and to Danny, and just to everyone. Thank you so much for coming in and showing love, and for coming into the webinar today and sharing your expertise with the world. We've had people joining us from all over the world, from Argentina, Copenhagen. We had people from London, up north in Bolton. And to everyone watching on the internet, it's been great to have you on board, and we're going to take this time to answer some questions now. So I guess we'll start with the people in YouTube who are asking some questions. Again, it's open to all the panelists, and we encourage and invite all of our viewers to ask questions. So a question that's coming from Salu on YouTube has asked, is it logical that Drupal 8 ends before Drupal 7?
Yeah, let me jump in and answer that one, because that's a really great question. If it's possible, could we jump back to slide 13 or so? It was like the third slide in my list that showed the support.
Yeah, sure. Just bear with me.
I don't know if that's easy enough to do, but when we get there, let's see. 1, 2, 3. This one here. Perfect. Here's the logic behind why Drupal 7 might get an extended year and Drupal 8 does not. Drupal 8 support still ends November 2021, and there's two broad reasons. The first reason is that Drupal 8, beginning with Drupal 8, continuing with Drupal 9 and beyond, we've adopted a strategy of using the best of other open source libraries that are out there in the world as well. So we use the Symfony framework, we use Twig, which we talked about with theming, CK Editor, jQuery, these other open source projects that are also integrated into Drupal. And those have their own security horizons, timelines, and end of life for their particular versions. So to ensure that you don't wind up with an out-of-date version of Symfony that doesn't have security support as part of your Drupal 8 site, we need to make sure that you can update that with the transition to Drupal 9. So that's the primary reason. So that November 2021 date for Drupal 8 lines up with the kind of end of life for the integrated versions of some of these third-party libraries and services. The second reason is it's just easy. With Drupal 8, the upgrade to Drupal 9 is not going to be difficult. Another year's worth of support isn't really necessary because, as I said today, in many cases, all of the modules are already ready. The update process is not a replatforming and migration the way that it feels like it can be from going from 7. It's literally a update the way that a minor version update works. So it should be significantly easier. But yeah, that's the underlying logic about why that's that way. I know it seems confusing at first, but it does make good sense.
Excellent.
Can I jump in there?
Yeah, of course.
The way Drupal's worked in the past is that as soon as Drupal 9 came out, Drupal 7 should have ended life. They only ever supported 2 versions in the past. So we're actually really lucky that we've got Drupal 7. Obviously, this sort of conversation would have started probably earlier if Drupal 7 had been retired early. But actually, we're in a really quite fortunate position that Drupal have well, not chosen, not much choice really, but we do have this extra year, and it's more than we would normally be given to migrate to Drupal 9. So it's actually a good thing.
Excellent. Thanks, Duncan.
Sorry, Shiv, just a
yeah.
quick one. Alan needs to drop out now. He has another meeting. Thanks a lot, Alan.
No, thank you very much to Alan Botterick from Acquia for joining us. We really appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alan.
Awesome. Okay, yeah. Next question we have is from May on YouTube, and she goes, interesting webinar so far. Thank you very much for that. She asks, what is the right process to go through when designing our Drupal website?
So yeah, I guess I'll take that one. I think ultimately you need to have a strategy. That's what I would say. I think the other panelists have covered the bits of the process really well. You need to have a UX strategy, a migration strategy, a content strategy, as well as a usability and even security strategy. So once you have all of those strategies in place, that will be and of course the timeline and budgets and resource as well as like, the partners that you're going to use, whether you're going to do it in-house or work with a digital agency like CyberDuck. Once you establish all of those things, it's then just about delivering. So I'd probably say, strategy, delivery, but also bearing in mind what Mira was talking about around usability and accessibility testing, which, is absolutely critical.
I'll jump in and add another comment, which I think can be really useful. When you're working with a partner or an internal team on this design for your strategy, look into some continuous delivery techniques, some ways to deliver that value early. So maybe you do have a big overarching, like monolithic vision for your final web experience that you want, but you can almost certainly find ways to deliver essential portions of that and get it up and running and out to your audience earlier in the process, and then progressively iterate on that and continue adding the additional components of your site design.
Yeah, I'll jump on the back of that. Obviously, CyberDuck, like most developers these days, uses an agile approach, and certainly for me, agile means exactly what Tim just said. It's all about the biggest bang for your buck, and acknowledging almost in the same way that the user experience, what Mira said, is the website you need isn't necessarily the website you thought you wanted. So it's a much better way to develop the solution is to come up with a solution which meets most of your requirements, and then decide whether you want to tweak it afterwards. You might decide what you wanted isn't really what you wanted. And that's a very good way of developing. It means that you don't spend 90% of the time fixing 10% of the problems. You get most of the work done. And that's a very agile way of working, and we certainly recommend it and wholeheartedly embrace it here at CyberDuck.
Awesome. We have time for a few more questions. I have a question on YouTube from Gregory Courtois, who says, what features will be specific to Drupal 9 and which will motivate an upgrade before DA end of life?
Do you want to jump in on that one, Tim? I don't really know what's coming in Drupal 9. I know I've heard of a few things, but you probably know more about the roadmap than I do.
Yeah, about some of the particular highlights. So there are a few initiatives under discussion, and actually there's going to be a presentation from Dries, the project founder, at DrupalCon Global, which is a virtual event happening in July. So there's going to be a good chance to see all that. The kind of sneak preview is that there's still a continued focus on these content editor experience sorts of features, and also on this maintainability and cost of ownership kind of features. A lot of the fundamental technical core of what Drupal can do is incredibly robust. So much of Drupal 9's roadmap is going to be about making that robust feature set more easily accessible and available to regular users, easier for them to implement and handle. So some of the things that are included in that are further enhancements to things like the layout builder tools to expand their capabilities even more. Further enhancements to the API layers of Drupal to support things like decoupled and headless solutions. That could be a whole big conversation. And in particular, there's an initiative for automatic updates of Drupal so that you can actually update your contributed modules and update Drupal core itself in an automated fashion, which is one of the most common ongoing maintenance concerns. And we want to try and make that as easy and as secure as possible. There's a great model for that, and it'll be a really cool initiative. So
yeah, that's good. It's the same thing I talked about with content creation. So much work or so much budget, so much development budget in Drupal 7 goes to changing content. I mean, Drupal developers don't like generating content. They like writing code. That's what we want to do as developers. We want to write code, not tweak the layout of your website. Drupal 8 moves that, and Drupal 9 moves that to your content creators. It lets them do that. What Drupal 9 would do, as Tim said, will take away some of those other tasks that you previously paid a developer to do, the upgrades. And moving forward, that will free up your development budget to develop, which is what you should be spending it on, not making these run-of-the-mill changes that happen every couple of months. That should just happen, like on your phone.
Awesome. We have another question from YouTube from John P. His question is anyone pushing for a Drupal curriculum in secondary schools or universities to onboard the next generation of developers? Very interesting question.
I have no idea. Certainly a lot of the coding initiatives in the UK look to me to be quite, I'll use the word lowbrow, that's probably unfair, but they're good for introductions for young kids. There doesn't seem to be much in the way of that extended older kid sort of type approach for development. Drupal itself is very easy to pick up and start using. There's lots of resources out there which you can go and look at and start using. There's no reason why kids can't do that themselves. From my point of view, I learned to develop Drupal websites because I had a need to develop a new website. I looked around and picked Drupal. That looks good, I'll use that. It's very hard to learn anything without a need and a desire. So I would recommend, don't just learn for the sake of it. Come up with an idea. You might be, you might be the next Bill Gates, John. So think up something you might want to do. One of my first websites was a snowboard website. I'd just been snowboarding, and I wanted to put up my photographs of my first holiday. 5 years later, I was running Europe's biggest snowboard website. That sort of thing just happens. So give Drupal a go. If you're brand new to Drupal, just give it a go. See where it leads you.
Yeah, I'd add to that as well when it comes to sort of formal curriculum and things like that. I can't say that there's like a centralized international program for this, but the Drupal Association does coordinate with a lot of local associations and local communities across the globe. So I do know there are the local association in India does work with some local universities there that have Drupal curriculum. I know that there are some universities in the United States that have Drupal curriculum as part of their computer science programs. It's a patchwork, and I'm sure there's places all over the world. What I think we need and don't yet have is a central repository of all of that, but that would be a wonderful thing to put together.
Awesome. And I believe we have one final question coming in now from an anonymous person on Zoom, and they said, our company uses the rules module a lot in Drupal 7, but it seems not usable in Drupal 8 and 9. Do you have any idea about an alternative, and generally the missing of some widely used modules in D8/D9?
I'll try and give a quick answer. Maybe someone will know a little bit more than I do. Firstly, there are some things in the API of Drupal 8 and Drupal 9 in terms of event handling that allow you to do some of what you could only do in rules before with core features. So depending on what it is, you may not need the rules module to be part of that integration. Secondly, there is an intent by the maintainers to create a 9-ready version. They were waiting for the release in the earlier pre-release versions. I don't know how active the maintainership of that particular module is right now, but I know that there are others who use it who may get involved. And then the third point, and I wish I had it handy, but there is an alternative that's been discussed at least. I don't know if it's been published yet, about a sort of event state system that's even more robust than what I referred to before that could be used as a complete replacement. But I'm afraid I don't happen to know the current state right now.
I'm going to just quickly add to that, not specifically about rules, When I run Drupal 7 websites and been involved with Drupal 7 websites, when Drupal 8 came out, I looked at it and went, oh dear, it's not mature. I'm not going to use it. And I think a lot of people are in that situation. It's why they've stuck on Drupal 7. They looked at Drupal 8 and they went, oh, that's not going to work for us. Drupal 8 is matured. As Tim said, every 6 months we come out with it comes up with a new version. Drupal 8.9, Drupal 8.8 and Drupal 8.9 are nothing like Drupal 8 that you might have looked at when you were thinking about migrating. That's really important in terms of the slides I gave. Don't think that Drupal 8 5 years ago is anything like Drupal 8 now. It is very mature. Most of the stuff you probably need is in core. Some of it won't be, most of it in core. Give it a go in-house. Talk to CyberDuck or another agency nearby you're already using, and see where it can take you. It's not easy to move off 7. It's hard, in fact, but once you're on 8, it should be plain sailing from then on in.
Awesome. Thank you very much to our panelists. Just before we wrap up for the day and the session, I'm going to hand it back to Danny for some concluding remarks. Danny, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Shiv. So yeah, thanks for everyone that has attended all over the world. I know we've had people from Europe, Russia, America. Yeah, thanks again, and thanks to the great panelists. I think we've all learned so much today. The main point I just wanted to conclude on is look, the internet now is a commodity. We all do everything online now. We, I guess, as brands and website designers, we have a responsibility to develop the best possible user experience. It is important. In the UK, 1 in 5 people have some type of disability, which means that they'll have issues when engaging with interactive media like websites and phones. So yeah, designing for them is really important, and building applications that work for them is important. Also, research by Acquia shows that 73% of users will leave your website and go back to Google to find another website if they can't find what they're looking for quickly. So again, this isn't just about migrating and moving to a new version of Drupal. It's about reassessing the whole purpose of your website and what you're doing. But at the same time, once you're doing that, you have to address system performance. You have to make sure that you're aware of your budgets internally, and by upgrading your website and being more secure, ultimately you'll save money and you'll save time. So yeah, I just wanted to wrap up on that. We do have a really good white paper which includes a checklist about upgrading to Drupal 9. You can find the link in this presentation. It will go on YouTube as well, and the link's also on our website, on the CyberDuck website. So yeah, we'll be running another Drupal masterclass webinar. So it's going to be a bit more technical than this one. So that's going to happen on the 16th of July with Duncan and a few others. So hopefully you can join us then. And yeah, I mean, do stay in touch with us. So this is our email address, hello@cyber-duck.co.uk. We'd love to chat to you about any website design, build, migration projects with our partners from ShoreCloud, Acquia, and of course, a big thanks to Tim for taking time out of his busy schedule. And obviously it's very early in the morning where you are, Tim, as well, unlike here in the UK where it's almost 5:20 now in the afternoon.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Danny. And as just a follow-up, thank you so much to our audience for tuning in. We've had over 70 people attend across Zoom and YouTube Live. Thank you to CyberDuck. Thank you to Acquia. Thank you to the Drupal Association and to ShoreCloud, and to Mira, Duncan, Tim, Alan, and Luke for taking the time to come and join our webinar. As Danny said, if you have any inquiries, please feel free to message us and get in touch at hello@cyber-duck.co.uk. And this live stream will be available on YouTube afterwards for you to view. So please share, subscribe, and please, if you have any questions, don't be afraid to get in touch. Thank you, everyone. Awesome. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right.